I think is needed for the concept of goodness to be meaningful, not subjective and arbitrary, is there has to be like telos and purpose. Telos is a Greek concept and it predates even the Greeks, but you see it in the Homeric epics. Going back to Plato, he's certainly in Aristotle, they believed in telos. And telos is like the intrinsic purpose of a thing, its ultimate end. And you can use a simple, example like this microphone right here. It has an intrinsic purpose, an ultimate end. You might say that it is to amplify sound and do so by capturing the same kind of quality in which it was offered, or even improve it. Anyhow, we understand what the purpose is of a microphone, which gives the word good a referent, right? I can say this is a good or a bad microphone because I understand its telos, its ultimate purpose. And for thousands of years, the West was guided by this belief when it came to ethics, and it even pertained to human beings. Going back to the Greek philosophers, they believed that human beings had a telos. And of course, this is right in line with what Christians would believe, because there is a good God who created. His creation is imbued with inherent purpose. Mankind has telos. And so the phrase a good man or a good woman makes sense, because we can judge whether or not it's good or bad by virtue of how closely they are to living out that purpose. When you don't have telos, the word goodness loses all meaning. It could mean a million different things and nothing at the same time. And this is what happened in the Enlightenment. And folks tried to come up with some other universal standard for good. You think of utilitarianism and Jeremy Bentham and the principle of utility, and none of them really worked. And Nietzsche saw it all, and he just kind of waving his hand and said, "You've got to give up on ethics. If God is dead, there's no objective referent for ethics. It's time for the rise of the Superman. People just need to look within themselves, and they themselves can be that referent." Well, that's crazy, right? I mean, it's not crazy, because a lot of people are like, yeah, that's what we want. That's the world we live in. You know what Nietzsche never did? He never proposed a political theory of how one might live that out in society. If people truly lived that out in society, it would be sheer chaos. Even if we were all able to get past the nihilism that is inevitable, when we realize that goodness really isn't a thing, it's just something we create ourselves subjectively. I mean, that's crazy. So the world of ethics that we live in today has been just blown up. It's like we're living on the other side of some kind of apocalyptic event, because there is no shared vision of goodness. There's no shared vision of telos. It's every man for themselves. So when it comes back to this notion of, is Christianity good, and the very concept of good, if God does not exist, the word good is a meaningless word that is simply subjectively defined by whomever. But if God does exist, in him is a metaphysical bedrock for us to begin thinking about the concept of goodness. Moreover, life, human life, particularly because it's been created on purpose, has a telos. Now we've got some bearings to, a heading, a direction to think about the concept of goodness and being able to live it out, and even evaluate Christianity and whether or not it is good.
Yeah. Well, at the risk of oversimplifying a thing, because talking about that metaphysical bedrock and talking about chaos, that would be what would happen if Nietzsche's ideas were really pursued,
really lived out.
If we even go back to the Greeks and think about the fact that they were seeking really what was that metaphysical bedrock. That's what they were all about. What is everything composed of? What did it all come from? This is the birth of philosophy right into the world, is trying to find, is it water? Is it particles? Is it, all of this? And they weren't dumb to think that, right? They were working with what they had and could see, and they were brilliant. They understood, though, that for goodness to be real, it had to come from somewhere beyond. And what's interesting to me is that Aristotle wrote so much about, and others, so much about duty and virtue and the way that you ought to live so that you might flourish, like all of these things. But at bedrock for him and the other Greeks, according to their religious systems, was chaos. It was all chaos at the bottom, which is what made Genesis way back when, of course, prior to that, something that was so shockingly different. Because it was the story of creation that proposed that maybe it didn't come from chaos, maybe it all came from order, and that the metaphysical bedrock is order, and that a God who is ordered spoke the world into being. And so it was the Word, which meets us at John 1, like the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. But when we see that ancient world and we see the Roman thinkers meeting in Athens, like on Mars Hill all the time, then we meet at Acts 17, which is where all this comes to a head again, right? Gosh, I remember I loved my classes with Dr. John Mark Reynolds at Biola. He was the cultural apologetics professor and just kind of a whirling genius of a guy. But one of the things he suggested was, Jesus came at the fullness of time. And it wasn't just the fullness of time geographically, right? That Rome had conquered the known world, and that prior to him, Alexander the Great had Hellenized the world. So they all spoke the same language. And then the Pax Romana allowed for peaceful travel. And so when the gospel came onto the scene, it spread like wildfire because it's like the groundwork had been laid for it. But it was also the fullness of time in terms of ideas, that these thinkers were coming to meet on Mars Hill seeking what's at bottom, like where's the metaphysical bedrock? And they were coming to different conclusions about the telos, right, Mike? You had the Epicureans, right, who were eat, drink, and be merry. That's what it's all about. You had the Stoics who were, no, we must deprive ourselves of these good things so that our souls might be shaped in this way. And they were influenced by those who came before, and Plato, and separating, and again, oversimplification. But here Paul was saying this whole, what was it? The statue to the unknown God. And he gives them the answer in the fullness of time. Let me blow all your categories wide open. Here's what's at the base of it. And it's in him, a person, that you live and move and have your being, or your telos, or you find your purpose. And of course, he rhetorically split them right down the middle, as he did. But that's where my mind went when you were talking, Mike. And it just
I think that's good, right? A lot of people haven't studied philosophy, don't think about it. That, like, the fundamental question of philosophy, like,